Opposition leader Tony Abbott yesterday gave a speech to make himself look more positive. He talked about his plans for tax cuts, he talked about being a Conservative, and he said he'd softened in two important ways. One on parental paid leave, and the other, well, here he is.
Over the years, there are indeed two significant issues on which I've changed my mind. In both cases, I'm confident, prompted by the better angels of our nature. With Geoffrey Blainey, I used to worry that multiculturalism could leave us a nation of tribes. But that was before I became the Executive Director of Australians for Constitutional Monarchy and discovered that some of the Crown's strongest supporters had not been born under it.
Now to our panel. Tanveer Ahmed, psychiatrist and Fairfax columnist, and Greg Barnes, lawyer, refugee activist, former chairman of the Australian Republican Movement. Greg, Abbott's words, honey in your ears.
Well, I don't know about that, but I think it was significant, Andrew. I think it's very significant that he uses the M word, because this has been an issue of contention for the Liberal Party and Conservative side of politics for some years. I was wondering why he did it, because it seems to have come out of the blue, but it may be linked to the Liberal Party trying to soften its image in relation to migrant voters.
Is it about a defence of multiculturalism, do you think, Tanveer, or is it just a symbolic thing?
I think it's partly. I think it's more a reach towards migrants. So the New South Wales election, the Liberals won very handsomely. One of the key trends in that was a lot of migrants, first and second generation, for the very first time they voted Liberal. And I think the Liberal Party have identified this more nationally as a group they can really try and corner off the Labor arena. And I think it's more a signal to many migrants. Rather than saying we're necessarily outright advocates for multiculturalism, I think it's more a signal that we're outright advocates for first and second generation migrants of Arab or Asian background in particular.
But I would have thought I'm from an immigrant family, and I would have thought a lot of immigrants would share my concern about a nation of tribes and government policies to encourage that.
I'd agree. I think you'd get a varying response. And I did find it unusual that he linked migrants to the monarchy. Like, I'm not convinced that that's one of the burning issues the migrants would care about. But I think you'd get a varying range of views. And multicultural still is a dirty word in many parts of the community. That's why I didn't think he was a strong advocate for multiculturalism. I think what he was saying was that migrants, you should be voting for me. I don't think he was saying, go multiculturalism.
Greg, it seemed to me that he was all in favour of multiculturalism when he realised that migrants voted for what he wanted.
I was just about to say that, Andrew, that it seemed to me that it's exactly what he was saying. He was thinking, these are wonderful people, they support the British monarchy, therefore I like them, therefore I like multiculturalism. There's a sort of Jesuitical logic to that, I guess, but it was lost on me. But I do think more seriously that it was about a softening. And Nick Polling must be telling them something.
Yes, I think he wants to soften his image, but I thought it was an interesting time to do it, to make that statement, because this is the week where Sydney in particular has been in uproar over the Carnita Matthews case. Now, this is a woman who was jailed for 6 months for making a false claim about a policeman allegedly trying to rip off her niqab. It turns out that she was free. The sentence was overturned this week. The judge wasn't satisfied. The person who made that complaint was actually Williams underneath that niqab. Now, the problem, I thought, was the scenes outside the court where up to 20 Muslim men are yelling and jostling with police and fighting the cameraman, the journalist, and, for me, the excuse given for that amazing performance by Matthews' own lawyer, Stephen Hopper. Have a look at this.
They're obviously happy about the result, and they're expressing it in a way that's culturally appropriate to them.
Tanveer, culturally appropriate? Which culture? How appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, it's very worrying when you see scenes like that. But I guess what I'd say is sometimes in sections of the Muslim community, I guess that outright religiosity is more a test than, say, a way of expressing religion. And I think what this group was showing, it was more saying Allahu Akbar, etc. It was more a symbol of protest against, say, the dominant culture, be it the broader society, etc.
That's exactly my point. It's an us against them mentality.
I totally agree. So I think it's really worrying. So Stephen Hopper trying to justify it. I think it's this little example while perhaps isolated, I think it critically shows a couple of things. First, groups such as Muslims and particularly people who are particularly religious, like the lady Matthews, will jump to racism very quickly.
Too quickly.
And she accused him of racism without any justification at all, thinking she could sit on that. And two, periods where I have no problem with people, practising their culture, but where that clashes with Australian law or our ability to practice or enforce that law, absolutely, that should be modified.
Greg, did that worry you, the excuse given by Stephen Hopper?
Well, as a fellow lawyer, he's closer to it than me. But what I would say is that, and I do want to put this in a broader context, scenes outside courtrooms are getting worse more generally. I saw in Hobart, which is generally a very peaceful place, most recently, 3 people absolutely belt the crap out of each other out the front of a court after a case. I think there's a broader issue here. I understand what you're saying, and I'm not trying to avoid it, but there is a broader issue here about the way in which people react after court cases. I don't think you can excuse. No, well, and I think the us and them culture of the legal system encourages that. To some extent, but I don't think you can ever justify it as a lawyer. You can't justify violence.
That's what I thought was really quite interesting, that Stephen Hopper would say this is a culturally appropriate way of doing it. Now, if that's true, then we should worry about the culture.
Well,
if it's not,
I don't think it's culturally appropriate for anyone to have an altercation with anyone else out the front of a courtroom or anywhere, for that matter.
I sense with the multiculturalism thing a unwillingness to tackle the most extreme expressions of this tribalism. Like Sheikh Helaly, you might recall, Greg, the former Mufti of Australia. This is a man hate preaching for a long time, and Labor overturned moves to throw him out when he overstayed his visitor's visa. Excusing that kind of behaviour is somehow culturally appropriate.
Well, Andrew, I do want to come back to the point I just made earlier, though. There is hatred right throughout our community. I see the most vile expressions of hatred put out by people from all sorts of backgrounds throughout our community, and I don't think that we ought to be honing in on one incident and saying, look, this is the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem, as I said a minute ago, is that the legal system, or in a sense, the media's portrayal of the legal system, has been allowed now to come up with a them and us mentality. We saw a few weeks ago, for example, people who were charged in relation to a case. Where people screaming at them, vile hatred. And they were, Aussies of 5 or 6 generations.
Look, it happens on both sides. It's when the excuses are made that I don't like it.
I agree with you.
Yeah, Greg Barnes and Tanvir Ahmed, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Now, coming up, climate skeptic Lord Monckton tells us why he lashed out at global warming guru Ross Garnaut.